Every year during kickoff, a couple dozen programs comprised typically of first alumni, along with some FRC teams, try to tackle the current year FRC game in just 3 short days. Coining Robot in 3 days, these teams create a robot with the goal of helping inspire and showcase possibilities for teams to build off of by testing and documenting their progress. Fun each year puts together a subjective ranking list of these teams for both education and entertainment, and for REEFSCAPE, 10 FRC correspondents ranked the top 20 Ri3D teams that we could find some sort of robot reveal on. In the past, we've utilized a points ranking, but this year we are ranking teams against each other in the following 4 weighted categories. Practicality, in our opinion, the most important aspect. Can teams utilize this design and build something better or model some of their designs off of this robot? Performance, based on what we could see, how well would this robot do on the field compared to other Ri3D teams and their creations? Documentation, how well did this team document their progress for others to easily find and benefit from their resources? This could be many different mediums, from blogs to videos, CAD and code resources, and more. And finally, wow factor. How cool and inspiring is this robot to the community? Are people going to be talking about it? Couple things to note. Rankings were completed on Friday, January 10th, so some teams may have additional resources available since this recording. With 10 correspondents involved in the rankings, we did try to find as much information about teams as possible, and each correspondent independently submitted their own rankings. Any correspondents that were affiliated with an Ri3D team, those rankings were removed about that team that they were affiliated with, and we also removed the top and bottom score to create our aggregate ranking. We also did not consider supplier-specific robots or robots only designed in CAD. Thank you to all Ri3D teams who put in tremendous efforts to help inspire the community. Remember, these are our rankings, and let us know in the comments which teams you feel should be ranked differently, and let's see who's going to take our #1 spot in the REEFSCAPE 2025 Ri3D rankings. Starting on our 20th spot, it's going to be NOCA Tech coming in. Overall, they were our 20th team. Practicality, performance, and wow factor down in the 20th spot, documentation in 19th. So Samantha, tell us a little bit more about this team and what you saw.
All right, so NOCA Tech is from North Canton, Ohio. So they've got a wheeled kind of gripper claw on a arm on an elevator. Now, unfortunately, they don't have too many pictures and videos of it done. I really want to see it working because it looks cool. But they did show pictures of their progress in prototyping. I think they've got a deep climb on there because they posted pictures of various stages of prototypes. If you see the triangle in the middle, I think that's where that is.
I do like their package that they have. It's a really thin robot, especially with their elevator. They also have a lot of documentation on their CD post and also on their YouTube page with a bunch of videos and stuff like that. So I wish they had a video to actually show the full robot package, but they unfortunately they don't yet. Hopefully something comes out soon. But overall, I like their package.
Coming in our 19th spot is coming in from Kettering University. Overall practicality and performance, and also wow factor in 19th and 18th in documentation. Tassif, what do you see here from Kettering University?
So first I want to talk about their documentation. It was a bit weird because majority of their stuff is in a Google Drive folder from what from what we could see on their CD posts and stuff like that. But they seem to be aiming towards an algae/processor bot. But from the videos that they've shown, it's been having a bit of a problem of being able to pick up the algae and hold it. And I'm kind of worried if teams will be able to replicate it. But I know with some more fine tuning and stuff, teams will be able to grab onto the algae and hold on to it. Probably need to extend that arm that they're currently showing right now, is how the algae just bounces out. So I'm kind of worried about that. Um, Other than that, I can see where they're trying to go from. It's just they haven't been able to fulfill that goal that they're trying to do.
Yeah, well, that was one thing I really picked up when I was looking over them is it seemed like a cool concept. It's a lower degrees of freedom option that should be able to handle LG. But what we saw with the reveal is I couldn't really see that. It looks like a cool design, but the reveal didn't show a ton, and the documentation was mainly Google Drive videos without specifically labeled purposes to them. So that's just kind of a concern of how can teams dig up what I think really would be a cool design.
In our 18th spot, we do have Purdue coming in. Overall, had a better documentation. Some of the other teams we saw down here where they were 13th in documentation. However, practicality and wow factor a little bit down in the 18th spot, performance in 16th. Nick, tell me a bit more about what you saw here from Purdue.
Thanks, Tyler. I actually ranked Purdue a fair bit higher than the average that created this ranking. One thing that I think is worth pointing out is that they hit some crazy swerve issues during their build attempt, which took away a lot of the time they would have otherwise had to be building. On top of that, they had to move shop twice, from their initial workshop to a family farm machine shed to an abandoned school gymnasium. While they weren't able to implement the control system in time, the design appeared to show enough promise for me to rank it a bit higher. I personally generally like the way their design looks to work, as I think the 4-bar could be quick with proper tuning and provide an alternative to the elevator that has been used more generally. I'm not sure that the robot as it currently exists would be effective at reaching L3. Given that they did post their CAD, however, I think it could serve as a design for teams to modify to make it more effective. I do have a small concern with their end effector, specifically their very narrow coral intake. Given that there's no safe zone around the coral station, I think they could be more prone to being defended out of collecting coral, or without defense, to simple human error.
Robot in 3 days at Purdue this year hit the nail on the head with documentation, but just fell a bit short with the execution of their build. As Nick was saying, they did encounter some issues throughout their build process, but their robot simply didn't work, which led to their lower ranking. Definitely a lot in the design process and build blog to dig into though, and that teams can learn from, so good job Purdue.
Next up, we have the first alumni of UW-Madison coming in. This was their first attempt at robot in 3 days. Overall, we had them ranked 17th, but did have some better marks in terms of their wow factor, which they were 14th. Practicality 16th, as well as documentation. And then we had them in 18th in performance. Tell me more about them, James.
Yeah, thanks Tyler. The first alumni of Madison to put together what I think is a really exciting robot in 3 days. Their end effector is certainly going to inspire a lot of teams in REEFSCAPE, and it will be intriguing to see how teams are able to adapt it to an even higher level. While the robot is not exactly ready to be an ultra-competitive bot, it is exactly what you want in an Ri3D build, engaging concepts with easy-to-follow documentation. FAM was one of 2 teams to collaborate with fun, creating some solid videos along the way. Wisconsin-Madison is one of 4 Big Ten schools making an appearance on the list. Congrats to the Badgers from the first alumni of Madison on a great first Ri3D bot.
I agree. This is a great Ri3D. It's simple, straightforward. Teams can implement it well, or different aspects of it well. That dual game piece intake is really nice to have one mechanism and you have options.
And in our 16th spot, we welcome in Ri3D Brazil. So gave them some good marks in terms of practicality, where they were 13th, but 17th in performance, documentation, and wow factor. Samantha, what did you see from Ri3D Brazil this year?
Yeah, so they've got some great concepts together on the robot, and honestly, these mechanisms can be reworked and repositioned in with different superstructures or what have you. So they've got that great roller bar that flips out, and they can intake and score pretty good with that. It's pretty standard, but showing ways to do it is great. Um, their climber is a shallow climb, which is one of the only shallow climbs I've seen, actually from Ri3D. It's just pinches that and pulls it on in. It's actually pretty simple.
Yeah, they do have a really nice pivot algae intake, which works really well with the processor. I am kind of worried about their climb as it's relying on elastic and holds on the bottom platform of the cage, which I am worried that it could slip or anything like that. But other than that, it's a really nice um, overall algae mechanism, and they have a really nice coral mechanism that is also able to pick up from the ground, which we haven't seen from much teams, and the human player station, but it's limited to L1 and L2 based on the rotation that you pick up the coral.
In our 15th spot is UMN Robotics. Overall, gave them pretty constant marks all the way through. 13th in wow factor, 14th in documentation and performance, and 15th in practicality. Tassif, tell me more about them.
Yeah, Minnesota has a really interesting robot that I actually kind of like. Their algae mechanism can pick up the game piece from the top and bottom of their intake, as we just saw. Their algae mechanism, as I guess you can call a handle type sort, is also able to pick up the coral from the side of the robot from the ground, which can shoot out to L2, which is pretty cool, but I'm worried about lining up every single time. Now, their actual coral mechanism is on a telescoping arm uh, which I'm also kind of still worried about lining up, as it's kind of similar to what they have on their coral mechanism. But overall, it's able to reach all the way up from level 2 to level 4. So I'm really excited to see what other teams can take from this, since it actually holds the coral pretty well.
Absolutely. I really think Minnesota did a pretty solid job here. They posted a fair number of videos of mechanism design overview, some daily recaps, reveal, and a walkthrough. They also linked their CAD so teams can see exactly how their thing was built. One of my concerns is their algae control. When the algae is in their robot, it doesn't look to be super tightly clamped down, making me concerned it could fall out of the robot. Also, with the narrow coral intake, we know the coral pickup places aren't protected, so you could face defense that makes it harder to retrieve there, and also human error could cause things to not go into your robot. Overall, solid design with a lot that's simple and seems to do the job well, and I think teams can learn a lot from it.
Up next in 14th is FAMNM. They've been around for quite a few years here in Robot in 3 days and beyond for other things as well. Given some pretty great high marks in documentation, where they were 10th, performance they were 12th, and then down in 16th for wow factor and practicality. Nick, how did you judge this team and what did you see from them?
Well, I would say I generally agreed with the rest of the crew's rankings on it. I think their design has a fair bit of inspiration for other teams as well. Their algae holder uses a long roller to pull algae in, then hold it down beneath the net against the ground. One possible drawback I see there is that the collector must hang out pretty far from the robot to hold the algae, placing it at risk of colliding with other robots and breaking. However, if the intake is sturdy or compliant enough to survive such a collision, it holds onto the algae incredibly well. Their coral holder also provides an interesting idea, wrapping a tube around the coral and then placing it in place with a compliant star wheel. The intake to feed that system does include a bit of a hopper, allowing for a wider range of possible drop locations, but involves sending the coral uphill. This may have a functional purpose I missed, but the handoff between the slight upward slope on the hopper to the downward slope of the end effector looks like a point where scoring elements could be lost. They also did a good job with their documentation, posting videos about several facets of their work. They had a well-organized Chief Delphi thread to direct people to their needed information, and at the end, posted a full bill of materials so teams can replicate their work.
Hailing from the Ford Motor Company Robotics Building at the University of Michigan, FAM's Robot in 3 Days named Dean checked a lot of boxes for me in Ri3D. While it was certainly on the jankier side, Dean showcases what I think could be a pretty strong mid-tier robot for the season. I think teams could flesh this out into a solid robot for the comp season. Nice job, Wolverines, and go blue.
In our 13th spot is going to be Robot in 3 Days Mexico, coming back for another year. Ri3D MX brought a great documentation, and we ranked them 8th overall for that. And in practicality, 12th, and in performance and wow factor, 15th. Overall, a good second year from them. James, what'd you see?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I think Robot in 3 Days Mexico and the Robot Enchilada showcased a pretty quality robot this year that can play REEFSCAPE to a high level. With a beautiful rotary wrist mechanism, the ability to place coral on all levels, and a thought-out strategy for how to collect algae, this robot has the future. I would have liked to see a climb added to the robot, but I'm sure that teams that were inspired by this design could work something out for the climb. Their build blog and videos were super helpful and intriguing to follow along, which was extra important for a unique build like Enchilada. Congrats to Ri3D MX on a solid outing this 2025 season.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of room on this robot to fit a climb, so I'm excited to see if anyone figures out how to add that. I do agree that arm and wrist is neat and actually reminds me of some of the FTC designs from this year.
In our 12th spot, we have Michigan Tech coming in, had great marks in documentation, in 9th and overall pretty solid performance, 12th in wow factor, 13th in performance, and 14th in practicality. Samantha, break down Michigan Tech for us.
Yes, Michigan Tech, they've got a funnel intake from the player station, and that lines up the coral into their end effector, which goes inside the coral. So you need some precision in that hopper, but they had it working pretty good. They had a mechanism called Flippy Doodah, which was pretty funny, but it did work pretty well to score the algae. It like flips around and hits the algae and knocks it right out. Documentation wise, they posted all their CAD, including prototypes and concepts, which is really neat to see those beginning stages of ideas, especially if you're new to CAD. That's super helpful.
Yeah, their Flippy Doodah that they have is really funny, but it also kind of scares me because of how fast it just whips around. Um, but overall, I think it's pretty neat, and their rotating mechanism for the coral is also pretty cool. That teams should definitely look at whenever they're picking up coral as corals can be picked up in different places. And I also love that they got their mascot involved in this video, in the reveal video.
In number 11, it's apparently Mihirungs is how you pronounce that. So, but a team coming in with pretty good marks, practicality, performance, and wow factor, all in 11th, and documentation a little back in 15th, but overall 11th, and a great job from them. Tussy, break them down.
Yeah, so the documentation has been really well. Their entire reveal video is essentially them going over the robot, which is really neat, especially for teams. One of my concerns is their mechanism for on their elevator, their 4 bar. It seems to be a bit complex to add on an elevator, and it could be bouncing around and stuff like that. But it's overall their algae mechanism is really good to take the algae off the reef and move it to wherever they need to. They also have a really unique grabbing mechanism for their coral, and to open and close to hold onto that coral, which is pretty neat. And I think a lot of teams could look into a different way of maintaining that hold on that coral, and this really does it.
Absolutely agree to see the whole 4 bar feels a bit over complex, and the grabber is definitely unique. One of my concerns with this that I've kind of shared with a lot of the bots is again that narrow coral intake. What we see there is that when teams have that, they don't have nearly as much wiggle room to be off from one of the tracks for the human player to get the coral onto their manipulator. My concern there is that teams could see more trouble at the coral station getting themselves loaded, especially under defense.
We're cracking the top 10 with pride. Great performance overall, and definitely a bit of a wow factor. This is a cool robot, no doubt. But we didn't see a lot of documentation from this team, and practicality in 10th as well, too. So, Nick, tell me more about pride here.
Absolutely, Tyler. It's actually the one place where I did disagree with them was that practicality. I felt that the number of degrees of freedom in the design, 2 rotation points, and an elevator might make it a bit more complex than is ideal for some teams, especially given that one of the pieces to be tuned is the rotation of the entire elevator and end effector assembly. However, it looks like a strong robot, taking a page out of 111 Wildstank's 2023 Roller Band Claw and using a similar architecture to merge both systems into one end effector. It looks like it should be able to collect and score rather effectively, though I am concerned how variance in the coral's horizontal position could impact lining up against the reef. Its ability to score coral from either side of the robot could also prove helpful, as drivers can spend a bit less time and mental space on lining up their robot in the right direction. Their only public release was their reveal video, so while we can't see what their design process uncovered, teams can use the code and CAD linked in that video's description to see how the robot is made and runs. As such, it still seems possible for teams to pull plenty of good ideas from this design.
And as Nick was saying, Pride of the North put together one of my favorite concepts we've seen in the list thus far, and with some more refining would be a very competitive robot. Their intake seems to be inspired by 111 Wildstank's 2023 intake, an intake that my team used on our robot that year, and I think could be really good in this game. I especially love Extendosaurus' ability to shoot algae into the net, and I think that will lead them to a very competitive robot here this season in REEFSCAPE. Well done, Pride.
Let's get into our 9th spot here with Bison Robotics Ri3D. Pretty much across the board, right around that 9th position here, 8th in practicality, and then 10th in performance, documentation, and wow factor. James, tell us more about Bison, what they have to bring.
Thanks, Tyler. And once again, I like the Bison Robotics Ri3D build this year, coming in with a very well fleshed out end effector. Similar to what we saw with Madison's mechanism earlier in the video, it's a dual purpose beast that we'll definitely see on some machines this season. With the addition of a swerve drive and a climb, this robot would be a strong contender at the district and regional levels of play. I enjoyed watching through their various videos they put together, proving just how well-rounded of an Ri3D team the Bison are. I think that the vision and autonomous align features that some teams have developed will be key for high-level robots this season, and if this robot were to be equipped with those, they would be a force to be reckoned with. Well done, Bison.
Yeah, this robot should be pretty easy to manufacture and modify for teams. While that end effector does look giant, I don't think anything on there is super critical dimensions. You don't need a giant CNC, or you could even put together multiple parts to make those big plates.
In our 8th spot, it is BumBotics here. Great marks in terms of practicality, which is something we'd love to see as well, too. 9th in performance and wow factor, and then 12th in documentation. Samantha, break down this cool robot.
Yeah, so they've got simple, achievable design goals on their robot, and it can still do quite a lot. And the robot looks pretty light, too. Their CD thread includes a very detailed descriptions of strategy and all the process they went through. They've got pictures along the way and line drawings and all that. what I find neat is they've got two algae scores. They've got one for the lower one, which is they've got a pivoting roller bar, and that they can use for ground take or ground intake as well. And then their elevator has both their coral score that comes in from a or gets funneled in from a ramp, and then they got wheels on top, which is just a really simple addition to be able to descore the algae from the top. Um, I'm looking forward to when they finish their write-ups. They said they have a lot of college students that had to go back to school, but they still got some more write-ups coming. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I really liked BumBotics. Their algae mechanism is similar to Minnesota, as they are able to pick up the algae from the top and the bottom of their mechanism. But overall, I love their algae reef mechanism on the top of their elevator, and I love how their coral mechanism is already pre-angled to fit onto L2 and L3.
Big Sky Robotics is up next in 7th. Their highest mark was in wow factor and then 4th, but they had great marks in documentation in 5th, performance in 6th, and practicality in 9th. Great job overall from Big Sky Robotics. Tassif, what'd you see in this team?
Big Sky has a really nice touch and own it intake for both coral and algae. Everything just picks up with their bottom intake, and really nice handoff mechanism from their ground intake to their arm/elevator mechanism that is able to reach all the way to L4. They're able to pivot that arm that they have to reach all of the levels, and they also had a bunch of pictures of their CAD on their Chief Delphi and really nice recap videos on their YouTube page. I'm really excited for teams to take a look at this and see that you can add pivots and really benefits you to reach all those levels on the reef, as you need to fill all those reefs to be able to get the ranking point. So it's really nice to see these different mechanisms all come together and work really well.
I definitely agree there. It was incredibly cool seeing this robot working with all of its different pieces coming together. I'm always a bit standoffish with handoffs and the risk of dropping a game piece into your robot, but then again, Cranberry Alarm did it last season to great success. My other concern with this robot is its 3 degrees of freedom on the elevator alone. I feel like that might be a bit much for a lot of the teams going for Ri3D, but nonetheless, incredible design, very cool to see, and I think a lot of teams can gain a lot from seeing it.
Our number 6 robot, well, this is a team that built 2 robots overall, and we were very impressed by both of them. I never know if it's Quokka or Quokkas, but this is their low cycle robot. Great marks. Documentation really about the same with their high cycle robot, but one had to be 2nd and 3rd, so intermix there. But practicality 6, performance 8, and wow factor 8. Overall, this is really cool to see them build 2 robots here. Let's talk about their robot first, their low robot first, Nick.
Absolutely. The Quokka Low robot, or Whooper as they called it, is great in what it's able to do with such a simple base. With so few moving parts, it's able to collect coral from the ground and score it on L1, pull down algae from anywhere on the reef, collect that algae to go score it in the processor, and it's one of only a handful of robots to display deep cage climb abilities. All of these make it capable of achieving the co-op bonus and helping rather well with the coral and barge RPs. With its smaller geometry, its deep cage climb also looks far less likely to be voided by a wheel touching the ground or bumping the chain or top of the cage, both possible concerns for the other prevailing deep cage designs. While definitely a bit trickier to pull off than the Kitbot, it looks like a design that has a strong point ceiling, and I think it could be a good model for lower resource teams looking for an architecture that will do a lot while overall being pretty simple. One possible downside at the moment is that I do not believe they have posted CAD or code for this robot yet, something which would be incredibly useful for rookies and lower resource teams looking to use this architecture to have a successful first season.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And honestly, I think this is a snub here of the top 5. This is my personal favorite of the Ri3D bots this season, and the lads from Down Under, they've just done it again. This low cycle robot could certainly seat high in quals matches with targets for those RPs, and I think it adds a lot of value to a playoff alliance as well. Their deep climb is just a thing of beauty. And if a team can figure out how to score LG directly into the net, I mean, the sky's the limit from a strategic perspective for this. Nice job, Quokkas. You did it again.
Let's get into our top 5. For this, we're going to have all of our correspondents on here chiming in with their thoughts about these top 5 robots. Let's start out with our friends, the RustHOUNDS overall. Pretty much across the board in 5th, practicality, performance, and wow factor. Documentation in 6th. Great robot overall. James, let's start with you and break down this robot for us.
And as you were saying, Tyler, the 5th-ranked RustHOUNDS are yet another well-rounded Ri3D team this year, and they've built a robot full of ideas to steal. Their build blog is intricate and in-depth, and their robot is nearly ready to go. With unique side deep climb, the only thing holding this back is really their lack of swerve drive. I really like their LG subsystem, and their coral handoff is elegant. Congrats, RustHOUNDS, on a great robot this season. I look forward to seeing how the first community is able to learn from your successes.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see a robot that works on all four levels of the coral. The L1 has me a little nervous if you're going to be stacking on top of other coral because it might get in the way or not come off. But then again, you do have to get a good amount of coral on there before that becomes an issue.
Yeah, I really love this robot. I can say that my team is actually working on copying that deep climb mechanism. My only issue is making sure that nothing hits the top of the cage, as it could damage any part of the robot. But overall, Rusthound also showed some simulations on their documentation as well, using Advantage Kit and all that stuff, which is really cool for some advanced teams that love to use those simulations.
Absolutely. This is an incredibly cool robot. I still remember my jaw dropping when I saw that deep cage climb work. I kind of couldn't believe that such a small system was able to work like that. My only, I guess, concern for this robot is that its manipulator for coral is a bit complicated with the elevator attached to a rotating arm with the handoff in there. But overall, it's still an incredible robot. I mean, it introduced the deep cage concept that I think we might end up seeing in quite a few robots this season.
One of the things I want to comment too, I remember with the Cranberry Alarm team when they saw the climb on this, that they're like, "There's no way we can ever package a climber." And then we saw this, like maybe we could package something like that on the Cranberry Alarm team. So definitely, I think we're going to see a lot of teams take inspiration from this climber. So great job overall, the Rust Hounds. This is a phenomenal team here. Ninjineers is a team that I've been a big fan of for a long time. They've appeared at the Las Vegas Regional where I've had a chance to see them for a couple of years, and here they are building a phenomenal robot in 3 days robot here. So number one in our wow factor overall in rankings for that, third in performance, it's seventh in practicality and documentation. Samantha, tell us more about this awesome team.
Yeah, so this team's got it's a clean build. It looks to be pretty effective. It does look like it needs some precision with programming, but that is not unobtainable. I want to see more of that intake. It's got, that full width ground intake, gets it up real well. The hopper, I have a little few concerns about, but honestly, that probably just needs tuning, which, you can only do so much tuning in Ri3D. I'm going to assume this is inspired by, there was a design in 2019 that had both game pieces on the end. This one's really fun to watch.
I really love the turret on the elevator. It's really unique and it is a bit of complex, but with all the documentation that could be shown, especially with more coming soon, a lot of teams could take into that and be a bit more unique with having a turret in a pick and place game.
Absolutely agree there. It seems a bit more complicated than a lot of RI3D is going for, but there's plenty of room for different types of designs. We have so many teams now that everyone can go for different things. This robot definitely seems to have gone from being a coral specialist, but with what they're able to do, that's far from a problem. I'd say it's more so a benefit. That coral intake really impresses me, as I think it's the only proof of concept we've seen for a truly wide, somewhat touch it, own it floor intake for coral. Everything else has been rather narrow. Even the low Quokka bot was rather narrow in that regard. So seeing someone get that truly wide, almost touched on a coral intake was very cool.
So just like my fellow correspondents have been saying, I really like the Ninjineers and their great handoff mechanism. Their wide intake, I think, is similar to what we'll see at a high level this season, which gets me really excited to see what 2383 can put together for their competition robot. Great job, Ninjineers. Awesome Ri3D robot.
This reminds me a lot of the FTC robots we've actually seen this year for the Into the Deep game, where they're running. You see very common in FTC. They're running vertical and horizontal, almost elevator types on it, or like a linear slide that way. Now we don't quite see that in this robot, but the overall concept of what this is, really definitely something like that. And of course, as mentioned before, what you see in 2019. Great job, Engineers. Very impressive overall. In our third ranking, we saw their low cycle robot before. Now that's their high cycle of Quokkas, whatever you want to call them. Overall, phenomenal robot on this. I know amongst our correspondents, we had a little bit of disparity. Some people had them ranked a little higher. Some had them ranked a little bit lower. I think this is a phenomenal machine. Third in practicality, documentation, wow factor. Fourth in performance overall. Tassi, if you were a big fan of this robot, tell me more about him.
I was a really big fan, and I'm hoping you go to Australia next year. After being in the top 3 of the past 2 seasons, I really love their rotating mechanism. I know we saw a few other R3D teams do something similar, but this robot has dual mechanisms on both sides of their end effector. It's just really nice package overall. It is a bit complex for some low resource teams, but their documentation has been really stellar. They recently released a video of just going over the full robot, and there's also still a lot of resources on CD that's been going on. But overall, they really love the packaging and able to do everything. One thing that they can do is ground pickup, but realistically, all the coral is at the loading station. So having to be able to do everything else and really smooth systems is just really nice. And I just love their turret that they have on their elevator.
I do agree with you that it's a very cool feature to have, but it's also rather complicated. I mean, reading their build thread, they did have some issues with underestimating the amount of time they needed to get it done. So it really raises the point of how scoping is a very important thing in FRC when you're working with these robots to make sure you don't overexert yourself. Like they only ended up with about 6 hours to program it. This is not at all a diss of them. It's an incredible machine, and I'm glad they made it. It's just a point that you do need to be careful with your scoping, and this is an example of that.
So I like this Quokka robot as well, but I think it's really interesting how we're starting to see kind of this meta develop with some of these top Ri3D bots with the swing archetype. The swing archetype allows for every aspect of the game to be played, and it'll be interesting to see what, if any, top teams or mid-tier teams are able to take this approach for successful comp bots this season. Nice job, Quokkas.
Yeah, I think it might be a little out of scope for a complete new team. However, not too bad. I like that they got that deep climb packager in there, although they do touch the chain, which is something that would need to be worked on.
I think for me, honestly, I think is the most impressive thing about this program is their ambition to build 2 robots and to showcase 2 different areas for it. And I know we broke these robots apart to judge them individually, but overall, to have that ambition to be able to follow through and have good documentation for it is something that really checks all the marks of a great RE3D team. So congratulations. Coming in our second spot for the second year row is the Cranberry Alarm team. Now, a couple of us from Fun were there recording as well. Cranberry Alarm was first in practicality and documentation, second in performance, and fifth in wow factor overall. So, Nick, let's throw it to you. How did you break down Cranberry Alarm, and what did you think of their build?
My biggest takeaway was how it's a relatively simple architecture that does a lot. They provided a design which is able to efficiently use all scoring elements and complete every challenge available with them, except for directly scoring in the net. While it can't collect coral from the floor, its massive hopper means that it can pull up to the human player station with a lot of wiggle room. It also appears to be a kind of architecture where something like a RustHOUNDS climb or a standard pull-down climber could be a plausible way to get some decent endgame scoring on a cage. Their entire build process is detailed through a series of videos breaking down each step along the way. One possible concern I do have is that the robot carries algae mostly outside of its frame. While they did show that it is held relatively tightly, I'm concerned that a defending robot or an alliance partner in the wrong place at the wrong time could strike the algae and knock it out of their system. Given that they're able to ground collect, this probably won't be a huge deal, but some way to store the algae further into the frame might be better. Other than that one issue, it's a very strong design. It has relatively few degrees of freedom and a lot of traits to make it a robust design.
So yeah, I'm in agreement with Nick there. I think Cranberry Alarm, they put together a strong robot this season, but I'm really excited about the documentation and video stuff that they're able to put out. Nice job, Fun Crew. I think it really gives teams a blueprint to a competitive robot this season. So congrats to them on a great robot in 3 days. Excited to see what teams can do with it.
This robot, I mean, it's amazing as is, but it's also got some potential. There's a lot of open space on it for teams. They could take this design and add to it. And all these mechanisms can also just be separately put on the robots too. It's great.
Yeah, I have to agree with Samantha. There's a lot of open space, especially in the back, but I know that is also used as the funnel for the coral. They just need to add a climb to make it an overall robot, but still a nice package, and I love the mechanisms that they have.
One thing I want to comment is that, obviously Fun was there filming that, and I think gives Cranberry Alarm a bit of a leg up in terms of documentation. But one of the things I appreciate is that they had immediately their GitHub posted and their CAD posted right away for teams to absorb. And they always do come out with a technical binder as well, too, which I think is really important. So even if we take those video aspects out of what Fun has created, and while I don't vote in this, I think Cranberry Alarm does a really good job in terms of having public documentation. And that's something I definitely appreciate for what they have to bring. And congratulations to our number one team for Robot in 3 Days rankings in 2025 REEFSCAPE. It is Penn State. This team was so cool to see. They were our top performing ranked and also tied for number one on our wow factor as well too. Practicality second, documentation fourth. Overall, this is just a great video to watch on here and a great overall Robot in 3 Days to really follow along with. James, we'll start with you. What did you like about this team and break them down a bit more for us?
Well, Tyler, I got 4 words for you. We are Penn State. The pinnacle of this year's Fun Robotics Network Robot in 3 Days rankings is the newcomer Penn State. Bursting onto the scene in just their second season, the Nittany Lions have come to play, building the highest performing REEFSCAPE robot we have seen yet. They can pick, they can place, at the same time, they can deep climb, and this robot is just simply elite off the bat. The only downside I see is the sheer amount of space their climb takes up on their robot, but their incredible ability to package the rest of their robot makes up for it. Congrats on a fantastic robot and taking the cake as the number one Robot in 3 Days bot of 2025.
Yeah, so I agree with you. That climb, it does take up a lot of space, but if you've got it, this is a super simple, easy climb with just like 1 degree of freedom, and all you got to do is drive up to it. Um, but otherwise, this design, super sleek and simple. I absolutely am a huge fan of their reveal video and all the artistry that went into that. Like, it's just beautiful. I love watching it.
Really think that Penn State was the first deep climb video that I saw this season so far, and it just brought a lot of my brain was running too fast because their cage goes through their robot. It's just really unique, and their Chief Delphi thread is still actively going on. I keep on seeing so many notifications from it. It's an active documentation, and I love their deep climb.
Absolutely. Penn State brought a lot of cool stuff to the table. I think they were the second deep climb prototype I saw after that Lego guy on day one. Their ability to just swap the scoring elements as they go on the reef is incredibly cool and will definitely provide an efficiency boost in the season for teams with this architecture. The only tiny concern I have is that relatively narrow coral collection spot. I am a bit concerned that under defense, that could make it a bit trickier for them to get coral from the human player station. But with the rest of their architecture all combined, overall, an incredible robot coming out of Penn State.
I really, really like this feature where they're able to score the coral and pick the algae at the same time. I think that is such a cool thing to see because when you think of cycle times and trying to get scores down, that is super impressive from what Penn State had on there. I agree with all you as well, too. This is just a phenomenal robot. The way that they're able to continue the interest of the community by talking about it more, not just on Chief Delphi, but in other mediums as well, too, I think really does speak to how much wow factor this robot does have. Congratulations to Penn State, our number one Ri3D team for the 2025 REEFSCAPE season. Let us know in the comments which teams you feel should be ranked differently, and remember that our rankings were completed on January 10th. Also keep an eye out from our friends at Kettering University for the Ri3D and KitBot early competition. From all of us at Fun, good luck to all teams in the REEFSCAPE season, and we hope that you'll continue tuning in to the Fun Robotics Network on YouTube and Fun FRC on Instagram and Facebook for more content to come.